You're listening to Journey for Truth with internationally known medium, Tai Yi practitioner, and radio host Tammy Urbanic.
So much for joining me. Journey for Truth Radio is always on demand and with many new episodes. Also, you can visit the new website for Journey for Truth Radio. It is, in fact, that, journeyfortruthradio.com. Sign up for the free newsletter so you are the first to hear about the new episodes, and you can also see the different episodes that are listed on that website. Again, journeyfortruthradio.com. Also, at jonalifeinstitute.com, you can sign up for that free newsletter, which is full of information on healing, different tools, different messages, just full of information that you can find very useful in your day-to-day life and when you feel that you are on a healing journey. And one more website, empowermentthroughhealing.org. You can see on there different life energy flow Tai Yi treatments. And one in particular is called C-Wave. C-Wave is a treatment that helps bring emotional and mental clarity. It is a wonderful feel-good treatment. On Life Energy Flow Tai Yi Treatments tab on the page, on the website empowermentthroughhealing.org. My guest this week is Rustie MacDonald. Rustie is a survivor. She has endured obstacle after obstacle that many could not even possibly imagine. Rustie will talk with us about her journey to gain peace and health. Rustie, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me and your patience. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you here. Now, I believe your trauma started in childhood, as I recall reading. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I actually think it started in the womb.
Okay.
I was really fortunate to pick parents who are so far from the spectrum of who I am as a parent to teach me the valuable lessons that I've learned. My birth mother was 17 when she had me. My birth father was about 15, 16. And they, we're Southern, and it's the Appalachia, it's Kentucky, it's the Bible Belt in the 70s, and certainly a teenage girl needed to go away to school if you were found pregnant. Certainly you could not confess in a religious community that you had a child out of wedlock. So there's this whole history there. She ran away with me. We moved to Florida, and I grew up in immigrant camps. I grew up in severe poverty. I grew up living on a bus without any running water outside of a water hose. We didn't have a toilet. And I honestly, I have to give her kudos. I'm 40 now. It's not like you can be bitter about this stuff anymore.
Well, some people are.
Well, I personally choose not. I don't choose that.
Wonderful.
So, she worked within the means that she had and the education that she had. She didn't even graduate high school. And at that time period, there was very little support for teenage mothers, and there was very little other than being ostracized and condemned. There just wasn't much to go on, so I think she winged it and did the best that she could. So we used to stand in lines, and I remember so clearly having jelly shoes from the church that didn't fit. And so my feet are sore, and it's the South, it's the south of Miami, it's Homestead, Florida. And most of the time it's 95 to 100 degrees, and you're standing in line at the Salvation Army or whatever food shelf at the time with sweaty feet. And I remember being a little girl looking around for hours going, why are they so hungry? Why are they so poor? I would never in my world as a little kid realized how poor I was. I mean, as an adult, I'm going, oh my God, we were dirt poor, literally. But as a child,
I thought I read that someone had abused you.
Oh, sexual abuse?
Sexual abuse when you were a child, or
yeah.
Okay.
So living in the poverty, living with a teenage mother, she ended up partnering with somebody who was extremely abusive. He was so abusive, he literally smashed her face on the concrete floor because she didn't cook dinner correctly. And my birth mother was a beautiful 6-foot-tall Cherokee Indian. She just had that Pocahontas gorgeous look with a broken nose. And he beat us intensely. He also sexually abused me, and that was from 3 to 5. So the poverty remained the whole time, but at that time, that was the first time I tried to commit suicide.
At that young of an age?
And that's what everybody says. How at that young of an age do you know to do such a thing? And I think for me, you know, growing up in the South near beaches and swimming pools and so forth, people are always like, you need to hold your breath, you know, and there's always this cautionary thing. So for me, I wrapped a plastic bag around my head so I could hold my breath forever.
Wow.
And she caught me, like, just in time.
Now, how did that frame for you later what you believed in terms of what you deserved?
You know, it took me a long time to figure out what I believed because I was very conflicted. Growing up in the South, you're at that time period, children were to be, you know, seen and not heard. Mm-hmm. You spoil, if you don't raise the rod, you spoil the child. So there's all of these conflicting messages, especially growing up in a community that's very Bible Belt driven. And for me, I knew it wasn't right because if you give me 12 spanks and I react the way I do and you punish me with a 13 because I cry, I can't help that. That's an involuntary action. So even as a child, I understood that there was something wrong with the way it was. And
I completely agree with that. I've always, I was raised in an environment where punishment was not used. I was very, very much taught that punishment is not needed. Now, consequences, yes. Disciplining, yes. Boundaries, yes. But
right.
Punishment's different. Punishment is delivered with you're bad, you're wrong, and so I'm going to deprive you of something, and I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to hit you on some level. And I know a lot of parents don't like hearing it in that frame because they like to use the word spank. You know, I spank my child. Well, okay, let's call it what you want, but you're still causing your child pain, which sets a child up for an expectation that life is painful. So I completely agree with your point of view here that is very conflicting. I love you, so I'm going to hurt you. Well, then kids grow up thinking love is painful.
And I married into that. So with my daughter, who's 11 years old, I can tell you the funniest story ever. So she is probably 1.5 years old, and she kept going under my cabinet. She has a little diaper on. She is feisty. Even now at 11, she's incredibly feisty. And she poured Comet bleach on her face.
Ooh.
Oh, yeah. And I'm to tears. I'm freaking out. Well, oh, my God, what to do? So I pat her on the bottom. Nothing hard, just a little pat. She hits me back. I'm like, are you for real right now? You know, when I grew up, this is supposed to work.
Yeah.
You're supposed to, you know, listen. So I pat her on the bottom again. She hits me back right in the face. And I'm just looking at her. And I just start laughing. I'm going, this doesn't work. You know, and I'm not going to hit my kid hard because I know what that's like. So that's when I realized that kind of discipline is actually really not effective at all.
Right.
It's productive.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you married into it. Let's talk a little bit about your marriage, because as far as also what I read, it was not a happy union.
It was, you know, so as a child, I grew up in abuse and poverty and grew up with a birth mother who was very clear that all men are going to hurt you. And obviously I was raped as a young child, so, you know, my impression of men in general, my birth father left me at birth. I don't even have a picture of him. I don't know what he looks like. I imagine it looks like me because I look very different than she does. But so I grew up in a very conflicted place with my role as a woman or a girl or a female, let's just keep it as female, in a world where we're objectified. And in the world of poverty, females are extremely objectified.
I can imagine.
And so, you know, at the tender age of 8, I was a slut. I was a whore. I was all of these things that certainly an 8-year-old in the 1980s has no clue about. MTV wasn't even out yet, so you can't even blame it on technology. Like, you know, so my shorts are a little too short. I apologize. So there's that kind of pressure and that kind of issue in poverty. It's very demeaning. And when I married, I attempted a relationship that I wanted to show him unconditional love. He was already very broken when we first connected. He had two, ex-wives before me. He had an ex-wife who was trying to leave with his daughter. She was a drug addict. All of these stories that he told, which I've recently found out are not necessarily completely true. But I fell for it because here I am. I'm going to save the world. I'm going to save the world one person at a time, and I'm going to show you unconditional love because that's something I never had, and I can relate to you. Mm-hmm. So in a naive way, I thought that I was rescuing him. I thought that I was making his life better. I thought I was making his child's life better, when in fact I was an enabler. And the marriage was very abusive. And they call it gaslighting now. We didn't know what that was back then. And even to this day, even though we've been divorced for 5 years, I still go through it. And my daughter goes through it. So we are in a process of trying to find sanctuary or help or some sort of protection. It's not that he's necessarily completely a bad person. He just needs help.
So
and
what did he do?
I don't think I can say a lot of the things on air. They're not really appropriate, but a lot of the things, he used the children as weapons. He would tell my bonus child that I didn't love her because we're not blood. That was his big thing. If you're not blood related, then love can't exist. So I'm not really sure what the psychology behind that was, but for her it was very painful because here she lost her mother because of the stories that he told. And we fought for her because we genuinely believed in his stories, only to find out, 13 years later that they're not completely true.
So did he hurt you? Was he physically abusive? Obviously he was emotionally abusive.
Very emotional. Gaslighting is a process in which they make you feel like you're losing your mind, like you are stupid and you're inept and you're unworthy, and there's nobody on the planet that's ever going to love you because they're the only ones that can truly love you because they're the only ones that truly know who you are. So it's more of the mental abuse. It's more of the emotional abuse. And he would use the kids as weapons. He would manhandle them. He would call them names, and I would have to get in between to kind of, in my world, shelter them from that abuse. I mean, it's
So your self-esteem and your perception of your worth was already low, and you enter into this relationship thinking, okay, this is going to be a good relationship, you're going to be in love.
He promised me everything.
And then he just beat you down and beat you down.
Right.
So how did you end up changing that reality?
I died. And, it was really, I lost a child. We didn't realize that I was actually going through a miscarriage. We thought I was going through something else, and then we came to the understanding medically that I had a miscarriage. And when I went for fertility treatments and to try to have a child and was told that I would never have children, he was very pleased. He was very pleased at this because he's very materialistic. He has to have his boat. He has to have his to-dos. He has to have, fancy things. And, I grew up on a bus with water out of a water hose and a Coleman stove to cook my dinner, and I literally had a washing board to wash the clothes. So I'm poor just in spirit. And he was very overwhelming with having to have very expensive things. And when I had my daughter, I had the flu. Turned out it was pregnancy. When I had her, I felt extremely ill, and I had 72 hours to live. Wow. My ex-husband sat there with the doctor explaining that I had 72 hours to live. And he said, I don't have time for this. I've got to get the kids to daycare.
Amazing.
And the doctor just looked at me, and he's like, what is going on? And I'm sitting here with my 6-week-old baby in my lap, feeding her formula, which is not something that I condone. Not to say that it's a bad thing. It's just, for me personally, I would rather have breastfed. Knowing that I had 72 hours to live with a 6-week-old baby that I've wanted my whole life, to hear my ex-husband say, I don't have time for this, I gotta get the kids to daycare.
So you went through this period of being very ill, and his response was obviously
apathetic.
That's a better word than I was going to use.
I know.
And
it was nice.
So you chose to then leave, is my understanding. You decided to begin changing your reality based on that?
I changed my reality, but I also stepped back outside of my selfishness. And I say that harshly to myself, not to anyone else. But I don't know who my father is. I don't know what he looks like. I can only imagine, because I'm similar to my birth mother, but I don't look Cherokee Indian. I'm very Irish, and he was fresh off the boat Irish. So I assume that I'm very much like him. My daughter, I didn't want her to have those assumptions. And I didn't want her to have a relationship with her father because her mother said he was this and he was that and he was this. I wanted her to grow in and understand who he was on her own terms, not on terms that I made. So I stayed. I slept on the couch for 5 years.
Oh, interesting. So you stayed in the relationship to that degree.
Yep. And her sister was 16 when I left, and she was 5, almost 5. And I stayed for 2 reasons, and it wasn't him. And it wasn't really even me, because trust me, girl, when I left, I lost 40 pounds in a month.
Wow.
I slept for 7 days. Literally slept like I've never slept before. It was so amazing.
What inspired you to finally really leave? You said you've been divorced for 5 years. What pushed you out the door?
I rescued puppies from Baltimore, Maryland, and these puppies were pit bulls, which I have a huge passion for pit bulls. They have a huge reputation for being naughty, and they're really not. They're great dogs. And somebody had brought up 2 pit bull puppies from a litter that literally was taped. Well, they weren't taped. They were stapled to a telephone pole, alive, and shot at.
Oh my
for fun.
God.
And that happens on a regular basis. And so somebody snuck 2 of these puppies out of Baltimore to me, because I knew that, I'm diehard about making sure that these cute little patooties have good homes. If you have a bad home, you're going to be a bad kid. You have a bad home. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's not parenting to me. And I was able to find a home for Pepper, who was the girl. And she was just cute. She was like this calico pit, and she just was perfectly loving. And we were thinking they might be just barely 6 weeks. Not quite sure. Again, they were rescued from really bad environment. And the boy, Marley, who I really liked him. I would have kept him. He was calico. So he had all of the really fun colors. He looked like a little lion, but he was a boy. He was definitely a man's man. And he liked to pee on the carpet, which is a cardinal sin in my ex-husband's house. You do not pee on the floor. And again, not knowing how the puppies were, maybe 6, maybe 8 weeks old. I cleaned up the piddle, which is the normal puppy thing to do. Puppies do that. They piddle. Kids piddle. And he picked up Marley, opened up the garage door, threw Marley, again, not even 5 pounds, into the garage without even looking. You heard a bang. He slammed the door and walked out. So I'm upset because we didn't know if Marley was dead. I'm using the carpet cleaner to clean the carpet, trying to keep hose. And the oldest daughter walks in. She's like, Mom, what just happened? And I said, can you check on Marley? He's in the garage. And she just walked out to check on Marley on my request. She clueless as to what was transpiring. And he grabbed her and he started smacking her for disobeying his parental authority. I pulled him down and got him off of her and put him in between my legs to try to hold him because he's a big boy. And I asked him if he was done. Are you done? You need to be done. because he was just in his raging thing. He's a rager, or he's not. It's very, you never know who he's going to be. And at that time, he was raging. And he said, yeah, I'm done. I'm done. As soon as I let go, he got up and he smacked her in the face. My daughter, Chloe, was maybe about 3 or 4 years old. She's sitting under the kitchen table with her hands covered under her ears going, oh, God, please make. That was it. I was done. I was done.
Now, your health was also impacted by this greatly. How have you been, what was the health difficulty, and how have you been working to resolve it?
It's interesting period. We didn't realize that I had celiac disease, which is an autoimmune disorder. And it took about 18 months for them to determine. I went through every test that an alien would go through if they ever came from Mars. You know? I went through a radiation test, through this upside down check to see if your gut will hold liquid. It was crazy. And that in itself is very demeaning. The relationship that's failing on top of trying to raise a kid, on top of all of these other things. So they found out I had celiac disease, and I had to learn how to cook without wheat, rye, or barley. Eventually, it's really not a big deal. At first, it's very traumatizing because I love croissants, and I love Subway on Tuesdays where I could have my Subway sandwich for $5.95 or whatever. So it was kind of devastating when you realize that you have to change the entirety of your life. You have to change your shampoos, your laundry detergent, your dish soap. Yeah. Because if you come in contact, I break out in hives.
Wow. And
I have an individual in, my ex-husband, in his way, he tried to be, but he cross-contaminated everything. So that put more pressure on me to make sure that I made dinner first. So I knew nothing was cross-contaminated and I wouldn't get sick. And we didn't realize how low my B12s were. We didn't realize how low my Ds were. And yet I'm still having to try to protect 2 kids, still trying to go to work, still trying to maintain a normalcy with my own, because I was a zombie. Honestly, I was exhausted.
That sounds so difficult. So you had a very severe form of celiac from...
My intestine actually closed up entirely, so I would take a sip of water and it would come right out.
Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! And so how are you working with your health now? Exercising. Obviously, the diet is completely free of gluten and even residual gluten. So, are there other things that you're doing besides the diet?
I try to run 3 miles a day. I quit smoking about 3 years ago, so I gained 40 pounds, which was really interesting because I lost 40 pounds after my divorce. So I'm kind of going, that 40 pounds is some emotional thing that I need to deal with. I love yoga, I meditate, and I just try to be as clean living as possible. I try to let go of the smaller things that don't matter. We're in the middle of a huge storm right now, and it's hard to stay focused on being healthy when I'm focused on so many other things. Reading, writing, and I write as much as possible. That's very healing, actually. It's very cathartic just to get your words out, and you don't have to publish them. It doesn't have to be public. A lot of the stuff that I do is public, and that's actually, frankly, for security purposes and safety purposes. But some of the stuff that I do is not public. And your mind is this highway of stuff, and you can either swat at it and try to drive past it, or you can just say, okay, this is my highway, this is what I'm going to do and deal with. And it's really perception, and it's people who you associate with. So I cut a lot of ties with people that did not have our best interest at heart. And I definitely made it clear that it's not going to continue. The abuse is not going to continue. Hurting my kid is not going to continue. That was pretty strong, because I'm not a strong person, I don't think.
Well, I love
associating myself with things that make me feel good.
I love all of these changes that you were making. I think, a lot of individuals have a tendency, not everyone, of course, but there are many who have a tendency to see, okay, I have this issue with my diet. It's causing a reaction in my intestines or other areas of the body, and I need to remove it. And that's great, but it's important that we don't negate the mind, that we don't negate the emotions. We're not separate like that. Everything is interconnected. Everything works together. And, even science shows that. Science shows when you're under a lot of stress, mental stress, emotional stress, it's going to create issues within your physical body. So looking at everything, so your idea is doing yoga, writing, meditating, reading, exercising, very important. So all of these changes that you've been living yourself, you're now an advocate for others and helping them change their lifestyle. You're a coach, right?
I think humans are a tripod. We have our mind, body, and soul. Mm-hmm. And if our soul's out of whack, our mind and body are out of whack. If our mind is out of whack, our soul and, the spirituality, all of that is out of whack. So you have to cater to all three. And if you don't, that's how you end up continuing the same pattern. It's like a hamster on a wheel.
Absolutely.
I stopped coaching about 2 years ago because of the court stuff and the constant battling with my ex-husband. I wasn't able to give my students or anyone appropriate attention because I'm so distracted, which is not fair. So I just really stuck with writing my books and writing internationally and working with people on an international level, kind of generic, 380 degrees, because again, I can't give you 100% of my attention because of my own issues. Mm-hmm. And I think from that has made me stronger as, I call it the warrior. My inner warrior is able to provide more point because I'm able to not necessarily connect on an individual level. I'm able to broaden my perspective on a larger level. So I do a lot of speaking now, which is nice and humbling because I can't believe more than 2 people want to hear me speak. And I was very blessed to be asked to be a keynote speaker for 1 Billion Voices Rising February 14th of this year. And I spoke in front of a number of women. Some were from battered women's shelters that were just currently going through the process of detaching and disconnecting from their abusers. And I can tell you that was definitely a tissue fest. Wow. Everybody was very crying.
I love hearing those stories where someone can really learn from their unfortunate situations and turn it around and learn how to create a healthy lifestyle. And then, of course, to go on to teach others, because we all need a teacher on some level. We all need someone to look towards to kind of shine the light and to give us some resources, to give us some tools, to give us some insight, not to give us all the answers, but to kind of help us move in the direction that is most beneficial. Now, do you have a blog? Because I read some of your blog. Do you want to give the listeners that website?
Ooh, gosh, what did I give you? Because it's a little confusing. Shane made it a little confusing. I think it's rustiemacdonald.com, and if you go up to the top right, you have to scroll up and just hit blog. That's the easiest way to do it. I think he did it rustiemacdonald.com/category/blog. Makes it a little long. So just go to rustiemacdonald.com, scroll up to the top, hit blog. I blog every week. So
excellent. Well, Rustie, thank you so much for being a guest on my show this week.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm grateful.
Thank you, listeners, for joining me here as well on Journey for Truth on iHeartRadio and YouTube. Until next time, have a fantastic week.
Yay!
All right.
Sorry, I'm long-winded. It's like